Hello, and welcome back to my reading of my book, Breadman. If you're just now tuning into my channel, I've already read chapters 1 through 3, so you can definitely check out those videos right now. But to give you a little quick recap on what happened there, you had a scientist who created a serum that was meant to create super soldiers. His serum ultimately failed for the committee that he was making it for, but it did work on his 2-year-old son. So basically, anytime his kid eats bread, he gains extraordinary powers. And depending on what kind of bread he eats, he gets different powers. And now we're on to Chapter 4. Chapter 4, High School Graduation Ceremony 2006. Simultaneously, black and white graduation caps flew into the sky as young men and women bellowed out a victory scream. David leaned down and grabbed the cap he threw in the air and placed it back upon his head. He was then reunited with his family once again when they embraced him with a big hug. "Congratulations, David! We are so proud of you!" David took turns giving hugs to everybody. His mother, father, grandmother, grandfather. His father's hair was gray now. He had wrinkles starting to emerge on his face, but he had the same old smile that he remembered. Andy, David's best friend, ran up to him. "Hey man, isn't this crazy? No more school!" "Well, unless you don't include college," David replied. "I finally decided I'm not gonna go to college." "Oh, what are you gonna do?" "I'm gonna do what I never thought I would do. I'm gonna go work for my father. You know, we may never see each other again." "No, man, we will, I promise." With that, the two friends gave each other one last hug before turning around and leaving. Later on, David and his family had a congratulations dinner. They went to their favorite restaurant, Old Country Buffet. They all chose the buffet choice, and one by one, they each went up to get their food. David was the first to return. He had an all non-bread meal, just as a precaution. Tom designed a medicine that secluded David's reaction to bread. Although David was still in fact taking his medication, he is strongly advised not to eat bread anyway. For about an hour, the family talked about David and how they were so proud of him. Then they started debating on what he was going to do for a living years from now. At last, the family got up from the seats and they said their goodbyes. "Bye, Grandma. Bye, Grandpa," David said to his grandparents as they put on their coats. His grandfather looked at him, pointed his finger at him.
"You need to cut that hair, Sonny."
With a smile, his grandfather winked and turned around.
"See you around, kiddo."
With that last sentence, the grandfather and grandmother were walking out the door of the restaurant. They headed towards their warm, roomy car and drove off.
"Your grandfather's right, you know.
Beth looked at her son.
You really should cut your hair."
David ran his fingers through his long hair and said, "No, I like hair long. I wrote this book when I still had hair." David and his parents drove back to his home for one last night before moving into a place of his own. David stepped into the dark interior of his room. He flipped the switch, and the lights in his room came alive. His room was empty other than a single bed that leaned against the wall on the right, and the large suitcase that was sitting on the opposite wall. He noticed the trees outside his bedroom window above the bed. He remembered when he and his father planted that very tree so many years ago. He was going to miss that tree after he left in the morning. David slipped into his pajamas and climbed into bed. He had to get up early to get everything ready. That night he found it very difficult to fall asleep, knowing that this was his last night. When he finally did fall asleep, it was only for an hour before his alarm buzzed. As he got up, he looked out his window to give his tree one last look before heading downstairs with his suitcase. David set the suitcase down next to the couch in the small living room. He then changed into his normal clothes. As he walked back downstairs again, fully dressed, he was met by his mother and father together. His mother was the first to speak.
"Did you pack your medicine?"
"Yes, Mom, do I really still have to take them?" His father stepped forward and says, "Of course you do. You could end up being a danger to yourself and everyone around you if you don't." "Oh, okay, well, I guess this is it, isn't it?" David looked at the front door, then back to his parents. His parents both gave him a big hug before unleashing him. His mother told him that they would miss him. His father reached his hand out. David took it, and they shook hands. "Good luck, son." "Thanks, Dad." His father let go of his hands. David picked up his suitcase and headed out the house. With one last glance, he looked back at his parents. His mother was fighting back tears. David could see she was very unsuccessful at it. His father had his hand around his wife's shoulders, and he was standing tall and firm. He was successful at holding back tears, if he was even fighting the urge. David waved one last time and was gone. David reached the car his parents bought him last year when he turned 17. It was a blue Cadillac. He stepped in the car and turned the ignition on. He sat and stared at the small 2-story house for a moment. Then he backed away and drove off. He was gone now, off to go to college in Los Angeles. I'm going to read another chapter. Chapter 5. The day was new and getting worse by the minute. As David fought the heat driving in his car, he was looking for the nearest restaurant. At least there would be air conditioning in a restaurant. It seemed he was in the middle of nowhere. Everywhere he looked was just trees. There was no cars on the road. Finally, when David was convinced he would die of heat stroke, he found a restaurant. About half a mile down the road, he could smell the sweet smell of grills cooking hot dogs and burgers. He parked in the empty parking lot and walked towards Ron's Scrumptious Foods. He walked through the entrance doors and up to the counter. There was no one there.
Hold on a minute.
A voice called out to him from the back of the building. Finally, an overweight man with a beard came forward.
Sorry about that. I saw your car parked out there, but I couldn't stop my cooking.
It's okay. So, what'll you be having today? Can I have 2 hot dogs and a large root beer?
You certainly may. I'll be right back with your food. You can go ahead and have a seat.
David turned around and looked at the seat and tables. They were clean, perfect. There was no dust on anything. Maybe there's more customers than he thought there'd be. There were 6 tables, all lined against the windows overlooking the street he was just driving on. He had a clear view of his car. About 5 minutes later, Ron came out with a large plate which had his drink, hot dogs, and the check to his meal. Ron set the food on the table and headed outside to prepare more food just in case somebody else pulls in. David looked down at his meal. It looked delicious. He grabbed the ketchup bottle at the end of the table and poured the ketchup on his hot dog. Just when he was about to take a bite, he remembered that he wasn't supposed to eat bread. He was so famished at this moment that he didn't care. The pills worked anyways, so he took a bite. Energy surged through his body. It felt so good. He finished both the hot dogs in 30 seconds. He wanted more, but he had to pass. He only had the money for 2 anyways, so he took the money out of his wallet and placed it onto the table. He grabbed his drink and exited the building. As he walked into his car and set the drink on the cup holder, he saw Ron give him a thank you wave. David nodded back, and he was on the road again. 2 hours later, David was almost to the next city, Wichita, Kansas. It was a decent-sized city, bigger than some of the previous cities that he went through, and since it was dark, he needed to find a motel to stay the night in. He needed to find a bank to get the money for the motel first. As soon as he arrived in Wichita, he found a bank. The bank was Bank of America. That looked like one of the more popular banks here. He walked inside. As soon as he did so, 3 men with guns saw him enter.
Yo, get over with the rest of them.
The masked man pointed towards a crowd of people sitting in the corner. Yeah, this was one of the more popular banks. David quickly moved to where the people were sitting. Mothers holding their children and crying. Businessmen scared for their lives and at the same time scared that they will lose their jobs. There were also the tough guys planning a plot against the bank robbers. David heard the robbers cursing to each other to go faster and saw them peering over back at the hostages, making sure that they aren't doing anything stupid. David looked again to the tough guys. They were talking amongst themselves. David figured that they had their plan and were figuring out when they would strike. Suddenly, they stopped talking and looked forward again. He saw them use hand signals to each other. This went on for about 10 minutes, and then they went on for the strike. The robbers saw them too late as the tough guys tackled the robbers. One of the tough guys was successful and knocked out one of the robbers. The others weren't as successful. The robbers got them off and shot them down. Then they pointed the gun towards the first successful tough guy. The guy saw this and jumped to the side to get out of the path of the bullet. Although the path of the bullet was now heading straight towards the mother and child. David acted on his instincts and jumped to take the bullet. The bullet hit him in the chest, and he could feel it hit his heart. Just then, everything went black. End of chapter 5. What'll happen next? I guess you'll have to wait to find out. I don't have much to add here as far as inside jokes or anything. However, the restaurant that I stopped at, Old Country Buffet in chapter 4, that was a restaurant that I definitely grew up with my family. It still exists. I think there are 3 names for it: Old Country Buffet, Home Country Buffet, Ryan's. However, none of these restaurants exist in my hometown anymore. So it's really a nostalgia thing, but they do exist still. The other restaurant that I stopped in later, Ron's Scrumptious whatever, that was made up. And later on, when David stops at the bank, I included that in there, I think, because I Googled the most popular bank in Wichita, Kansas, and I don't know if it's true or not, but Bank of America popped up, so I put it in there. And that's literally all I have to say about these 2 chapters. So tell me your thoughts on it. Tell me if you want to hear chapter 6. And until next time, guys, peace out.